what happens now. You'll get over heartache.
And welcome to What's Happening Now with Laura. You know, today was supposed to have been my debut of my original show, Laura, and I was so excited, I was so happy to share this with you and to instead into your homes under a different name. Same Laura, tweaked slightly, hopefully better, but you know, um, it was just supposed to be some joyous occasion and to be broadcast into your homes. Sunday was Mother's Day, as we know, and while at Mass, I got so many wishes of Happy Mother's Day and all of this good stuff, and I had to constantly be reminding parishioners that I'm not a mother. I've never birthed a child, um, and they had to constantly remind me that the things that I do constitutes me being a mother. And what they're talking about is I mentor young girls and boys, but mostly girls in my community of Labrie. I direct a junior choir in church. And of course, if you've been watching this show over the last year, you would have noticed that the main theme of my show is marginalized children and women. And I'm also the co founder of a not for profit organization called Caring Hands Foundation, whose primary aim is to assist children who are abused or neglected. And so, by dint of this, my fellow community people and parishioners thought I would have made an excellent mother, and just because I hadn't birthed a child didn't mean that I was not a mom. So I was very heartfelt and I was touched, and well, I shed a few tears. It was very warm moment for me. It made me feel all good and fuzzy inside and gave me encouragement to continue doing what I'm doing. And I looked forward to today to share some of that with you and to just share some good thoughts, being that this was supposed to be the debut of my show, Laura. However, over the weekend, an alleged atrocity happened to four young children. And I say children because I'm not sure how old they are, but just by their voices, you could tell that they were kids. At the very least, young men and women. And that affected me so much. I wondered to myself if I could continue doing this. So I'm sitting here, being beamed into your living rooms and into your homes, feeling very bruised on the inside. Very bruised. My heart aches. My soul is hurting for what has allegedly happened to these children, these young people, the future of our country, our future leaders, future moms and dads. So I have this onerous task to not be my bright and bubbly self and to ask you to share into this, some would say, feather in my cap, but to share in the grief and the anguish of four young St. Lucians, and by extension, their families, their communities, our country. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, over the weekend it was reported that two young men and two young women were ambushed by unknown assailants brandishing guns and forcing them to do despicable and unthinkable and what should be unspeakable acts. And I'm going to ask you now, if you're listening and you're watching with your children and you have concern for them being exposed to dastardly acts so vile, so onerous, so egregious, that even in 2016, they remain taboo. I'm going to ask you to ask your children to leave the room, because I do not want to have to defend what our kids already know, what they are already being exposed to in schools, in churches, on the streets, even in their homes, by people who are tasked or charged with caring for them and protecting them. And if we want to be hypocrites, and if our children are still by large, naive, and protected, the choice is yours. To either have them sit and listen or to have them leave the room. But I want to reach out to those of us who can stomach this. Those of us who have a will to do something about the sorry state of affairs in our country. And I'm talking about what two young men have recounted to us via the media as having happened to them and their female companions. I'm talking about rape at gunpoint by multiple partners or people, because they're not partners. Your partner is somebody that you choose to be with. Your partner is somebody that you consent to be with, not somebody that has been forced to have sex with you, not somebody who is forcibly taking you against your will, not somebody who is raping you. You know, a lot of the times, even with the police force, we mask it and we cover it up and we try to powder it and perfume it and say sexual offenses. A sexual offense is somebody touching you in the wrong place, grabbing your breast, touching your butt, saying, sexual innuendos around you. That is a sexual offense. But when somebody takes you against your will, has sex with you against your will, that is called rape. And we have to start debunking the rape culture in order for us to start doing something about rape in this country. Can you imagine you've consented to have your young children, your young up-and-coming men and women, to enjoy the jazz festival? You trust them to do the right things, and so they're at the jazz festival enjoying themselves. And by their account, in the middle of town, in the heart of our city, with people around, 3 unknown assailants will come up to them, forcing them to do things to each other that perhaps they may have just thought about it. But hoping one day that they may get lucky in the right circumstance. And having to do that with people around. And on top of that, having those brutes force themselves. And I am reminded, and I'm taken back to the 5th of November 2015, when 2 young schoolgirls were raped in their homes. They were starting a life of independence, showing their parents that they could take care of themselves, that they did not have any need to worry, that they would be fine on their own and having animals break into their homes, into their home, while they're supposedly studying and getting ready for bed, and rape them and take away from them their innocence, their dignity. In effect, killing the children they once were. That is what happened to those 4 young people on that fateful Friday night. Their innocence was taken away from them. Their dignity was taken away from them. They were raped and they were killed. And in that space of time, 4 unknown people emerged. And according to what those young men said, I want to say bravo to them for speaking out. Because too many times, adults among us do not speak out. And when we do, we speak in veiled terms. I want you to now remember, because ever so often we have to recall the atrocities that have occurred to young women in this country, and apparently young men too, but they don't come out. And this is why I applaud these young men for being brave and courageous enough to come out and to say, no, this happened to me, but I am not going to be quiet. I want us to take a moment and reflect on those names. Mary Ratcliffe, a mother of 4. The youngest of her 4 children had yet to celebrate her 12th birthday when she was brutally ravaged, pillaged by her mother's sick and depraved lover. Because he was caught in the criminal act by Mary Ratcliffe, the child's mother, this pathetic excuse, this miscreant, because he was caught in this abominable, incestuous act on this poor child, because allegedly he needed her blood for obeah purposes. He promised the devastated mother, whom he claimed to love at one point, that if she dared to inform on him, that he would most certainly kill her. And guess what? He did. In the most vile, cruel, heartless way. We are reminded of Valinda Joseph. She was only 13 years old when her half-naked body was discovered in a field near her Saltibus home. Not only had she been raped, her autopsy reported that her killer had attempted to force gramoxone, the weedicide, down her throat. How vile must you be? It's not sufficient that you raped her. You kill her and you force gramoxone down her throat. Do we care, St. Lucia, about the anguish that these women suffered at the hands of our sons, sons of the soil of this land? We are also reminded of Cheryl Hunt, Valerie Lord, Giselle Georges for her style, Crystal Felix, Crystal St. Omer, and Alicia Hunt, to name a few. to name a few out of the long list of women who have met the demise, who have yet to get justice. You know, our sons, the sons of this land, take our daughters, the daughters of this land, and toss them aside like so much garbage. You know, I am reminded of our Prime Minister. And I think we have a clip of our Prime Minister. So I want to use his exact words. Yes, I'm going to borrow from my colleague, Rick, and allow for our Prime Minister's words to speak for him. So you understand, these are not my words. These are his words.
I believe that there are one or two serial rapists in our midst. A person who rapes once and gets away with it, they're going to do it another time. They're going to do it a third time. So we need to look at this issue very, very closely, and the police need to begin to look at the incidents of rape in a very specialized and focused way. You need to get a good database of who are the individuals, the perpetrators in our
one or two serial rapists in his midst. Those were his words. One or two serial rapists in our midst. I am disappointed in our Prime Minister, because as long as I have known Kennedy Anthony as our Prime Minister, never once have I heard other than that time. I may be mistaken, but for me, my memory does not serve me to remember any other time that our Prime Minister has dealt with rape. And he's only done it twice in this term of office. Once, as we saw in the clip, and twice on a political platform, talking about one or two serial rapists in our midst. And I'm disappointed because the Prime Minister obviously has information. And that seems to be a trend for our Prime Minister. Him having information that he refuses to pass on to the police, to allow the police to bring those perpetrators to justice. You know, when I was thinking of how to term this session of the show, and as you can see in the pictures that the outlines that we broadcasted, when I was trying to think of another way to describe RIP, which is usually rest in peace, I called up a few of my close friends and I said to them, if not for rest in peace, what would you think that RIP would stand for? And to my amazement, not less than 3 said rapists in Parliament. Rapists in Parliament. It hurts my heart that this is what it has come to. And for me, when I asked them further, rapists in Parliament, you know what of the things he said? We have never heard our parliamentarians address the rape issue over the years in Parliament. Not once have they ever addressed the rape issue in Parliament. And there are many ways that you could rape somebody. Just the mere fact that our women are being brutalized in the most heinous of ways, and our elected officials do nothing about it. And some of them say, oh, we talk about it in cabinet and we talk about it behind closed doors because it's a sensitive issue and we have to be sure of what we're doing. Hello. We have had at least 10 rapes every year for the last several years. More than that. What am I talking about? 10 rapes. I mean, in one month we had about 16 rapes. We've had on average about 50 rapes a year. 50 rapes a year. And not a word, not a word, not a word. We hear stupid platitudes like pepper spray. Hello? Have we done anything about making pepper spray available legally in this country? No, we have not. I remember clearly a few months ago, I had Honorable Emma Hippolyte in my chair being interviewed by me. And she assured me, yes, Laura, we're dealing with this. You know, we were talking about it. 2 days later, or was it the following day? And I don't like to toot my horn. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a very private individual. I don't like to toot my horn and big up myself and all of that, because what I do, what I say, what I represent is not for me. It is for the people of St. Lucia. But no other talk show host in this country in the past year has talked about rape as much as I have. And to have a session where the media is not even aware, people were calling me and asking me whether I was in that session with Alvina Reynolds and Emma Hippolyte and the rest of them talking about rape issue in this country. And they were very surprised that I had absolutely no clue what they're talking about. Veteran journalists in this country who have made it their business to be socially conscious knew nothing. And we are yet to know what came out of that session. Talking about what? What were the results? You know, and we hypocrites. We go in church and we pray all day long and fast all day long, instead of taking care of the business that they begged us to give them a chance to do. I am perturbed. I am perturbed. You know, eventually I had to say to my colleagues, I could not go with rapists in Parliament, because while we have been dubbed #1 in the Americas for freedom of press, we all know that that is hogwash. That report came out at a time when at least 2 television stations asked their reporters not to report on rape. Not to report on rape, and to be very careful how they spoke about sexual offenses. And I am very surprised. You know, and we say, oh, that's not true. They came out and say that's not true, and and nobody's telling them how to run their business. But out of the television stations that are operating in St. Lucia, I only heard about this story on 2. It's a wonder. You know, and then we have a plea for constitutional review. And our Prime Minister, nonetheless, has just tossed that aside and said this is not the will of the people. Because, you know, if it were the will of the people, it would mean that we would have the right for recall. And one of the first persons who would have been recalled, bar the Prime Minister, of course, would have been Philippe Lacobinière. Can you believe the nerve of that man to say to reporters, when they ask, is the police doing enough, for him to say, we could not have had such a successful jazz event if the police were... What the heck? So our concern is the jazz festival, and so we would deploy our resources to the jazz festival. Meanwhile, at this very same jazz festival, 4 of our young people are apparently brutalized and ravaged, and their innocence taken away from them. And we want to talk about leaving no stone unturned. I'm paraphrasing, so don't, you know, come down too hard on me. I'm not going to use this man's exact words. Who remembers them anyway? But the sentiment is what's important. He's going to leave no stone unturned to ensure that elections in this country is free from any criminal act. Meanwhile, before elections, our children, our women, our men, our future is being destroyed. What do you think about that, Mr. Lacobiniere? How about doing something, allaying the fears of our citizens? But you can't do that. You know why, Mr. Lacobiniere? Because time and time and time again, you open your mouth and everybody just wants you muzzled. Because the garbage that comes out of your mouth speaks of a man of no integrity and of insensitivity. It is amazing. It is amazing that this would have occurred. And the only thing you would say, oh, we could not have had such a wonderful jazz festival, if it was a successful jazz festival, if the police weren't deployed. I mean, seriously. And then to want to say, you people do that all the time. You people, as if the media should not be reporting on crime and should not be telling the nation that there is a scourge in this land. That there is a scourge in this land. I mean, I don't know how many of you watch Investigative Discovery, but there are always shows on this exact thing. Examples of cities that downplay rape, and they have multiplied and snowballed into a national panic. So much so that scores of lives get lost before a handle is brought on the scourge. Is this what we want for St. Lucia? Is this what we want for St. Lucia? For this situation to get so big, for it to be magnified so much that we can't handle it. We have sitting in our land millions of dollars tied up in a lab, a criminal lab, that we do not know when. You know, and the thing about it is that I'm not even sure if Lacobiniere even is lying, or he believes what the nonsense he's saying, or he just is so bereft, he's so lost that he's just speaking. You mean, how many times have this man promised that this lab is going to be open? That the lab, there's nothing wrong with the lab, that the inquest has been completed, that the results have been, you know, they have the results, they know what went wrong, they fixed it, and yet the lab is closed. We're talking about DNA testing. You know, I just want us to remember that when a woman is raped, it's not just, okay, you get raped, you go home, you take a shower, or you clean up yourself, and then you go and make a report. You can't do that. You've got to go, or you've got to wait for the police to come to you in the mess that you are. And in this particular case, where the 4 children were brutalized, where one was allegedly a virgin, and she was bleeding, she had to walk from town to CID in that condition. And there were people around. And she had to suffer that indignity of walking after having been raped at gunpoint, walk across town dripping of blood to get to the police station to make a report, then to be taken to the hospital to be tested and for a rape kit to be done. We want to talk about scarred for life. We want to talk about crime. We want to talk about it in isolation, and for some of us to be so stupid and wicked as to suggest that these things happen. You know, it's just 1 or 2 men doing these things. That's no big deal. You know, it's okay. It's happened ever since, you know, Jab Teti Mamai. You know, it's okay. I want us to remember this. There's an old saying that goes, si pani situes, pani vole. But in this case, si pani situes, pani inviole. Remember our Prime Minister's words. 1 or 2 serial rapists in our midst. Si pani situes, Pani Aviole. I want us to remember that. I want us to remember that every day. I want us to remember that every time a politician comes to our homes to seek our vote. I want us to care enough to ask of them, what are you doing about the rape situation in this country, in our country, in the country that gave us birth? I want us to think about this. I want us to ask ourselves these questions, and I want us to care. I want us to care not just for ourselves and for our immediate family, but I want us to care for St. Lucia as a whole. I want us to care. I want us to care. The power is in our hands. We have to use it. We have a voice collectively. You know, somebody called me today and said, Laura, let us march. Let us demonstrate. I said, you know what, girl? I'm not going to demonstrate. You know why? Because if I have to demonstrate in front of Parliament on Thursday, I am going to be taken directly to Bodley. Because I will not stand there peacefully demonstrating while those fat cats on both sides go into Parliament to talk about what? They're certainly not addressing my issues. They're certainly not talking about the things that matter to me. We want to talk about having social consciences, but we're not doing anything about our people. You know, somebody said to me earlier today, just before I went on air, that they have their at least 3 people, well, maybe about 5 people actually, mentioned that the story does not, you know what? The story does not gel for us because it is unimaginable that this is happening in our land. It does not gel for us because having to have dealt with a situation like this as a young man, having to promise your young friend that you're not going to let her suffer alone and that you're going to try to do your best to ensure that justice, that she gets justice, and that you get justice, that we get justice. Meanwhile, we have a just us minister whose only concern is about them. You know, I almost feel like we're in a situation where it's them against us. You know, we've hired somebody to do a job in our business, and they're holding us hostage. They're holding us. They've essentially abducted us and holding us to ransom. We've hired them to take care of our business, but they're holding us to ransom. When are we going to do something about it, St. Lucia? When are we going to stand up and say, no, enough is enough? You know, I want to suggest to us that every day, say around 3 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 o'clock, whatever is the busiest time in this country, that we put our pens down. Work stand up, like a friend of mine would say. No more work for 1 hour every day. The phones don't get answered. Nobody gets dealt with anything. Not in government, not in the private sector, not in the public sector. Everybody stops work for an hour every day. And let's see how much we can wake up our people, our government officials, to do something, anything. You know, and we have impacts on our back, and we have the Leahy law on our backs, hampering us from doing what we need to be doing. And they just want to say, it's not my fault. You know, I only just told the Americans what was going on in this country. It's not my fault. It's their fault for having Operation Restore Confidence. It's their fault for saying I'm going to leave no stone unturned. Leave no stone unturned and have criminals run for cover. It's not my fault. I never said that. They said that. But we must remember that the other they, also said that criminals should have no resting place. Oh, I forgot. They begged the criminals to give us a break. They begged them to give us a break. Instead of doing something about it, they're begging them. They're begging them to give us a break. Please, please, Mr. Criminal, don't hurt our people. Instead of doing something about it, and then turning around and calling us liars for saying that's exactly what they did. They're wimps. They're wimps. They say stupidness And when it comes back to bite them in the butt, they say we're lying. They say we're lying. But nothing can erase the fact that our Prime Minister once begged criminals in this country, and by his very inaction and the inaction of his cabinet, and I have to say his inaction because he has an ad out saying everything that has happened in this country, good, bad, or indifferent, is because of him. Everything. So there's no Philip J. Pierre for infrastructure. There's no Lon for tourism. There's no Emma for commerce. There's nobody for anything except Kennedy Anthony. So you know what? He's the biggest wimp. He's the one not doing anything. So La Corbinier can get away with all the nonsense he's saying because our Prime Minister, yes, our Prime Minister is doing nothing about it. Because when it's good, it's all about him. The narcissist in him comes out. So let him take all the blame. Please, Mr. Prime Minister, please, I beg of you. Why don't you beg the criminals again to give us a break? Meanwhile, let us continue to remember Cheryl Hunt, Mary Ratcliffe, Valinda Joseph, Valerie Lord, Giselle Georges, Crystal Felix, Crystal St. Omer, and Alicia Hunt, among others. We'll be right back.
What happens now? You'll get over.